It says that she is a gaunt, black-haired glamour ghoul who comes out through ominous...
You're still afraid.
Stop it now, I mean it.
You know how people exaggerate.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Goes this with...
Stop it! You're in...
Barbara?
Come on, it's time for the Ghost of Hollywood.
Double digits, wall crawlers.
That's right, everybody. Welcome to the 10th episode of the Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Miss Ragan here with Poxy and Leonard.
That's me.
Yeah, we know.
Oh, tell me how you really feel. So, the hate mail started pouring in.
There's some man fail.
Man fail. What is man fail? Nope, it's all hate mail.
No, some is fan mail. I mean, what are you talking about? We get some really nice fan mail.
Oh, come on. You're making this hard to play up, you know that?
Oh, so it's performance that you're after. Dance, Muppet dance sort of crap. I see how it is, Poxy.
Well, maybe you're looking a little too far into it. Anyway, I have some announcements to make.
Go ahead, do your thing.
Why, thank you, Reagan.
No problem, Poxy.
So, when we started this episode last month, Chris pitched the idea of reviewing this campy film from the 1980s called Arena, right?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Turns out that it was written by these two guys named Danny Bilson and Paul De Meo, who are also the minds behind no other than the best Enterprise film there ever was. To me, anyway, and that is 1985's Trancers.
So, where are you going with this?
Well, I'm getting there. So, I go down the rabbit hole of cinematic history again and find myself in deep shit like an hour into my research because these two guys have basically written fucking everything, right? After their days rolling around in the B-film section of Hollywood, they would go on to write that big film, The Rocketeer, 22 episodes of the television show The Flash. They wrote The Sentinel, The Viper, all kinds of crap. They wrote everything. Then they jump over to video games, right?
Foxy, you're gonna tell their whole life story or what?
Just wound up sending me all over the place reading. Anyway, I called Chris and I told him, I said, I was gonna email Bilson to see if he would talk with us about Trancers rather than Arena. And... so Chris agreed, and I hit up Danny Bilson, and he said he would come on the show, and I'm gonna, call him in a little bit, and we'll ask him about all the good stuff,
Are you gonna be able to stay on topic?
I always fail miserably at that.
You'll survive. Totally off topic, but what did you think of the interview we did for the show last week?
Well, I thought you and Chris were pretty well spoken. Zach rambled on per usual, which is why I always have to take over for him on here.
You ramble.
Yeah, but I'm fun.
He did fine, Poxy. It was nice of Nate to interview us anyway. I had a good time on his show. And in case anyone is wondering what the hell we're talking about, I was interviewed on a new podcast based out of Blacksburg, Virginia, called BSing with Big Nate, alongside two of our show writers, Chris and Zach, like a week ago. It's scheduled to post on the Ghost of Hollywood's website soon.
Don't look at me. No one tells me anything.
Well, I guess that'll cover it. I think it's time for a quick break, but when we return, Poxy and I will get started on tonight's Capsule Review, discussing the 1985 sci-fi action classic, Trancers.
The screenwriter of that film, as I said, Danny Bilson, I'm full of redundancy tonight, he will join us to discuss he and his late writing partner, Paul De Meo's work on Trancers, along with all kinds of cool stuff they worked on, including Zone Troopers, The Wrong Guys, The Rocketeer, many more things. And plus, he's going to talk with us a little bit about his final collaboration with Paul on Spike Lee's new film, Defy Bloods, which took place before De Meo's passing in 2018.
Poxy and I will also look into the strange story of the unreleased 1994 Fantastic Four film on another segment of the Cinematic Dumpster Fire.
So many fours. This is 1994 Fantastic Four film.
Anyway, as I promised, this one goes out to Big Nate in Blacksburg.
Oh yeah? What's he want to hear?
Don't worry, it's a good one.
Oh, you sure? I mean, if I didn't pick it, then...
Shut up, Poxy. This is Front 242 with Headhunter. You're listening to The Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Miss Ragan with Poxy Litter, and we'll be back shortly.
Stay tuned, Wall Grellis.
Thank you. Slowly.
I'm Jack Death. I'm a trooper in the 23rd century.
Jack Death, Angel City PD. May I see your stats?
What did I do?
Under Section 7 of the Penal Code, the Council authorized me to administer you a Trancer suspect examination.
You can't give me a TSE without a warrant.
I got your warrant right here now.
Okay. I don't want any trouble.
Hold out your...
My job is hunting Trancers.
I got nothing to hide.
Finding them
Negative.
and singeing them.
Look out!
Front 242 with Headhunter, right here on the Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Poxy Leonard with Miss Ragan, and the time has come for another segment of the Capsule Review.
Tonight, Poxy and I will be discussing the 1985 Enterprise film, Trancers, which was directed by no other than Charles Band himself. You know, though, I feel a little insecure about the 85 timestamp here, Poxy.
Oh, it'll be fine. It was released in the US in 85, so we'll count it. Plus, I'm already planning to fail miserably at everything beyond this point anyway, so there's that.
Stay on topic, Poxy.
No way, man. Bilson and De Meo created so many cool things, I'd be wasting the chance at asking him about all of their work, especially Zone Troopers and Defy Bloods.
That's fair. I just want to make sure we cover enough ground on Trancers to justify the focus of the episode.
Fuck it. Whatever turns out will be fine. We got this.
Back to Trancers. If you haven't seen the film, Trancers is a bit hard to describe if I'm trying to blanket its true nature as a picture, but I'll take a shot at it anyway.
Ooh, I'm excited to hear you formalize this whole thing.
I can do it better than you can.
Never said you couldn't.
Then what are you implying exactly?
Oh, kill me. You know just as well as I do that you hate the whole synopsis thing.
It's growing on me.
I can see that.
You gotta let me tell everyone about the damn movie or what, Poxy?
Floor's yours.
Alright, here we go. Jack Death, played by Tim Thomerson, is a cop in the 23rd century, chasing around number one bad dude, Whistler. Whistler has the ability to invade vulnerable minds of various people throughout the film, which is where the term Trancers comes into play.
Hold up for a second, though. It's odd that people don't line this one up with Blade Runner as much as they attempt to compare it with Terminator. There's just so much at play that I'm always amused everyone stops at the door of time travel and begins their comparative analysis there.
Good point, but it's because of their coinciding releases. Has to be. I mean, there are plenty of similarities, but that sync of release time really covered the spread of critical comparison. Anyway, where things get twisted is when Whistler takes a drug-induced time-traveling adventure to the past, where he inhabits the bodies of his ancestors and starts knocking off the bloodlines of current council members in the 23rd century setting.
Of course, Jack Death follows suit and chases Whistler back to the year 1985, which is yet another advocate for that timestamp thing we were talking about earlier, Reagan, where he lands in the body of some dude named Phil Deathton, along his own lineage, who happens to have just bedded a very young and upcoming Helen Hunt the night before Jack shows up in his body.
And the battle begins. But you'll have to go and watch it because I'm tired of sitting here groaning on like some useless narrator, feeding you obviously and easily accessible information, which you can find all on your own.
Oh yeah, but you didn't do too bad. You did alright. I actually think that may have been our most thorough synopsis yet, Reagan.
Well, in speaking personally of Trancers, I think it's definitely a fun film, and for Band, it's actually pretty cohesive, especially if you line it up with some of the other Enterprise stuff.
Well, can't speak much for that, but Bilson and De Meo are responsible for quite a bit of the Enterprise work at that time. They wrote Eliminators together, and then as part of those oddball deals Enterprise would hand out, they got a shot at creating their first feature together, which is 1985's Zone Troopers.
Zone Troopers is such a strange movie, especially if you watch it after Trancers. It's pretty much the same cast of Trancers with the bad guy from Class of 84.
Bad guy from Class of 84. Old Tim Van Patten. I know that Zone Troopers gets knocked around because of its pacing, but it's still a fun film to watch. And I feel safe saying this crew is really the ensemble cast for Bilson and De Meo during that period. I mean, most of them show up again in the wrong guys.
Do you think that the order in which someone watches these films may screw up their perception of the other ones?
You mean like, if you watch wrong guys first, then it would make Trancers really awkward or something?
Maybe. What order have you watched them in?
Well, chronologically, actually. And I swear that wasn't planned. Like, I didn't exist when any of these came out, so I didn't get to see them when they released. That's the order I saw them in.
Given that you planned out things accordingly, I'll believe it.
Yeah. This shit goes, though. Bilson and De Meo eventually get, they put together a production company, right, called Petfly. And then they go to work on all sorts of stuff under that banner. And there are plenty of things that, they were working on or had the potential to work on that didn't pan out for one reason or another.
Like what?
Roger Rabbit 2?
There is no Roger Rabbit 2.
Exactly. And I'm not going to jump off into that, so proceed ahead.
Rocketeer was the big one, though. That seems to be their game changer.
Yeah, that came out when I was a kid, and regardless of what critics said, at like 7 years old, that movie was fucking awesome. When I saw those jetpacks that they've been selling online, like the real ones nowadays for like $100K, I immediately realized that I still have some unfulfilled goals in my life.
Using a jetpack?
Hell yeah! You think I could get Danny Bilson to go jetpacking with me?
I dare you to ask him.
Nah, he'd kill me if he said no.
Well, what'd you think of Defy Bloods when it came out last year?
Wild film, for sure. Especially the stuff in the minefield. That shook me up. It was like, I don't know, I was off for an hour, probably a half hour after that. But I've read so much about this thing that now I'm curious to read the original screenplay.
Yeah, that'll never happen.
Well, regardless, it's definitely a great movie. Well executed on all fronts. The scenes shot in Super 8mm tripped me out, which is where I think I was truly won over. Sadly, Bilson's writing partner, Paul De Meo, would pass away prior to the release of The Five Bloods, and he passed away in February of 2018. Although the two of them, along with Kevin Wilmot and Spike Lee, would see multiple nominations for their work on what was originally titled The Last Tour, when it was initially written by Bilson and De Meo.
All right, Poxy, we're all over the place here.
Yeah, but there's a lot to prepare the audience for. Gotta make sure we cover as much as possible before we get Danny on here.
You ready to bring him on?
I want to take a quick break first. You are listening to The Ghost of Hollywood, and I am your host, Poxy Leonard, with Miss Ragan. When we return, screenwriter Danny Bilson will join us on the show to talk about his work with Paul De Meo on the sci-fi cult classic, Trancers. Now, this is The Dam with Disco Man.
Stay tuned, we'll be back shortly.
Take my hand, Disco Man. Are you just a one-night stand? Have some fun, jump the gun. But what's left when it's all done? But who are you taking for a ride? Disco Man. Better to run or else to hide. Disco Man. Disco Man. Tall and neat, watch his feet. Got the gist, he's all complete. Understand, Disco Man's heading for the garbage can. Have you just crossed a bridge too far? Disco Man. Jump in a cab and steal a car. The worst in the land. Disco Man. What I say. Disco Man. I can't understand. Disco Man. What are you doing? You're lost in a ruin. You're out of your head. You wanna be dead. Down the stairs, no one cares. He who wins is he who dares. Rock and soul, lose control. Just forget you're on the door. Like who are you taking for a ride? Disco Man. Better to run or else to hide. The worst in the land. Disco Man. What I say. Disco Man. I can't understand. Disco Man. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's go, man. Are you ready? Let's go, man. Are you ready? Let's go, man. Are you ready? Are you ready? We're disco, we're disco. Are you ready? We're disco. Are you ready? Disco, man. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready for the disco, man? Are you ready? 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 For the disco,
Hello, everyone. You're listening to The Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Miss Reagan here with Poxy Leonard, and we're talking to screenwriter, producer, and director Danny Bilson. How are you, Danny?
I'm great, and I'm very happy to be here with you two.
Nice. thank you for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. He's the first one that didn't say he was living the dream.
Yes, very first.
Everyone always tells us they're living the dream. So
I'm not living the dream. I'm living in the basement.
All right. You say you're living in the basement?
Yeah, I live in a basement.
All right.
During COVID, I work in a basement, which is actually a movie theater in my home. So I live like Howard Hughes during COVID in a movie theater. I just go upstairs to use the restroom rather than have bottles along the sides of the wall. If you saw that movie, I'm referencing.
Yeah, you're talking about The Aviator, but we actually, on the last show, we talked about Genghis Khan, actually. The old film, Howard Hughes, the last one he did with John Wayne, and then where they all got, suspected of radiation poisoning. So, yeah, we talked about that a little bit, but he was screening that at Desert Inn up there, on the top floor. That was later days in Vegas there.
It was Vegas, yeah.
Yeah. Now, so let's talk. I'm gonna ask you a few different questions tonight, but let's start with Trancers. So that would mark the beginning of a 4-decade writing partnership between you and your close friend Paul De Meo. Throughout your time writing together, the two of you would collaborate on feature films, television shows, comic books, and video games. So let's start here. I know you and Paul met in college, but when did you begin writing together?
In February of 1977. The year before, in the summer, we had done the play, the William Gillette play, Sherlock Holmes, at our school, Cal State San Bernardino, the Yale of the West, as I call it. We had done Sherlock Holmes, and Paul played Sherlock Holmes, and I played some safecracker or something. But we always loved Sherlock Holmes, and our professor and mentor, and really the person who started our career, and by the name of Bill Slout, who came from 10th Theater in the 30s and wound up, and then was an actor in New York and LA, and then became a teacher at Cal State San Bernardino Theater Department. He said, well, why don't you write it? We said, wow, it would be really cool to do a play with Sherlock Holmes and Houdini. And he said, well, why don't you write it? And we're like, whoa. And he said, well, if you write it, we'll do it. And that was the motivation that started us literally writing in a closet at school, in between classes and stuff. Paul had a yellow legal pad and would write, and I would talk, and he would script stuff on, and then we would type it up. So we wrote this play called The Houdini Deception, about Sherlock Holmes and Houdini and Mata Hari in a pre-World War I plot. It was Sherlock Holmes and Watson in their old age. And actually, after college, we were really close to getting it produced as a professional play with John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson, who had done Holmes and Watson on radio in the 40s. And we had a big producer, what's his name? Don? It's just right this second, I don't remember. Don Gregory, I think was his name, who had done some big plays, and he was interested in doing it because it was a big commercial play. Ralph Richardson passed away right around that time. I think this is around 79 or 80. And then it just kind of went away, and Paul and I had written another script, trying to write a movie script, and we got interest right away. John Dykstra, who was the visual effects supervisor on Star Wars, was interested in doing it as his directorial debut. And we didn't sell it, but we had an agent. It was called Gods of the Night. It was about a kind of a guy fighting demons like Conan in modern day LA with a Hitchcock plot. If I'm telling the story, from there, Paul and I worked as extras while we were writing when we came to Hollywood, so to speak, in 1978 after we graduated. And Paul can be seen in Blade Runner. When Harrison Ford enters the Snake Bar, Paul's there, and they've got his hair parted with like a Z on top. He's like standing, and Harrison Ford walks right by him.
Nice.
And Paul, I was on Happy Days for years and MASH, and Paul and I, 1941, you can see both of us in that Spielberg movie. We spent a lot of time on that movie, hanging out. We were writing through all this. I mean, we're talking about the beginnings of our career. We were writing through all this, and I got really sick of extra work. It was like we were just doing it too many days a week. I mean, it paid the bills, but it was a little mind-bending if you were trying to succeed in Hollywood and be a writer. And I got an opportunity to become a camera assistant. And through that, I wound up working on Ghoulies and a couple of Charlie Band things, Sword Kill reshoots, and then Ghoulies, I was a second assistant. And I'm standing there going, Paul and I can write better than this, or as well as this, I will say, to be kind. Because those are really nice people who do Ghoulies, and they're talented. But that was them starting out too.
Well, they gave you the courage to do it.
Yeah, but we had a script through a very strange set of circumstances. We wrote a couple scripts, one that got us in the union in 1980, called See You Later Alligator, about alligators in the sewers of New York. It was a stupid comedy. And then we'd written some stuff on spec, And then Richard Pryor had us write, because he was looking for 2 kids who'd write something for cheap, a crazy idea of his, and he thought we could write it in 3 weeks. We could later in our career. When we were young, we couldn't write that fast. He wanted us to write a script about Vietnam veterans who go to, who have commit some atrocities in Vietnam. They sort of terminate a village, which was kind of a thing that special ops guys did.
All right.
They kill a bunch of kids.
Sort of melee.
And in this movie, they get back together in America after the war, and they go to Central America and essentially save a bunch of kids in the 1980s war stuff that was going on down there with Death Squad, etc.
Yeah.
And we wound up writing this 160-page war epic, which is, I think, is a great script. To this day, I think it's a great script. And when I was working on Coolies, Debbie Dion, who was Charlie Band's girlfriend at the time and his head of development, I literally stood there and I'm sure I said, we can write better than this. I'm sure I said that. And she said, really? I said, yeah, we wrote the script for Richard Pryor. And of course that opened her eyes. And I remember she read that. And then the next thing I know, I wanted to direct, and we had some crazy deal to write like 7 scripts for me to direct 1. I mean, it was insane. It was total insane. When I saw the movie Ed Wood, it really reminded me a lot of my Empire years and my Charlie Band years. And I know you've talked to Courtney Joyner, who's lived. He came after me, but lived in that era too. I believe he did one of the Trancers sequels.
Yeah, he worked on Trancers 3, I believe. Yeah.
He's a really, really nice guy. And so I said, well, we could write better than that. So she said, what was the first thing we wrote? I always forget. I think it was Eliminators. I think it was, they wanted, he had a poster. This is how it worked. And maybe Courtney told you this or other people. And this is kind of the awesomeness of working with Charlie Band in the 80s.
All right.
He wanted to make 2,000 movies by the year 2000. And it was like VHS mania, but he would make a poster and go to the AFM and sell the poster and put names on it and stuff. There's no script. There wasn't even it was just a piece of art. So like Eliminators was Mandroid, mercenary, scientist, ninja with the guy with tank legs. It was like, I need a script. And I'll tell you, the truth of it is my father, who was Emmy award-winning director for Get Smart and was a director for years and years.
He was assistant director on Andy Griffith for quite a while and worked on a lot of one-offs too.
The very beginning, he was the assistant director on Andy Griffith. Aside from other stuff he did in the 50s, but he got his directing break right after that. And then he was a director for years and years, including The Flash and stuff that I did.
Yeah, I would say he worked with you on, I'd already worked with you on The Flash. I was going to ask you a
little
bit.
Yeah. So, but he said back then at Emperor, he said, well, look, whatever you do, make sure put some humor in. Well, I'm trying to remember, I can't believe I'm spazzing out on this. I think Eliminators we wrote first. But we knew Thomerson, and we met Thomerson right away, and we befriended Tim immediately. And similarly, Courtney felt the same way about Tim. I know that later on. But Tim became like an older brother to me. And his whole vibe and energy and SoCal, I was from SoCal too. I just loved Thomerson. And again, he was an older brother I never had. So his whole vibe, as soon as I met him, we started pumping into that Harry Fontana character, and then he wasn't available to do Eliminators, and Andrew Prine wound up playing that character, but that was totally written for Tim. The deal with Trancers was there was a script by Alan Adler, I believe is his name.
All right. Was a spec script? So there was already kind of something
Charlie may have paid. I think Charlie paid him for it. I think he wrote Metal Storm. This was all before Paul and I arrived on the scene. And Trancers was a script about Jack Farragut, the rat catcher. And I think he came from the future and came to the present. And we threw out the script and created Jack Death, and we just were so into Philip Marlowe. It was like, all right, let's do Philip Marlowe in the future. I don't recall that having anything to do with what Alan had written. So we created Los Angeles, as I recall, all that stuff and everything. I mean, so Trancers is really Bilson De Meo. And we connected with Thomerson on our love of old movies from the get-go. There's lines in Trancers that are from Lady in the Lake that we stuck in there. Like my favorite one is, "I like your tan; it's very Christmassy."
There are a lot of one-off lines, actually, like that you and Paul put in these movies. Like I had my writer put one over here. It said, "If I catch you in LA again, I don't care if you are a kid, an old lady, or a kitty cat. I'm gonna kick your ass." So there's
that's us.
A lot of good stuff.
But that's I believe Legendary is redeveloping Trancers as a big movie.
Yeah.
And my agent told me that, and I said, "Oh, call! You know, I really, oh man." And no, they weren't really interested. They had the guy who wrote Aquaman, which what it was.
Yeah.
So, but it made a lot of money. And the one thing that really, my point is, Trancers is Bilson and De Meo and Thomerson. Total. It's us connecting, and our love of noir and old movies and old movie actors. You know, with Thomerson, and maybe you've heard this before, it's like, well, a little less McQueen, a little more Bogart. I mean, it's almost like you got to direct them like that.
You know,
and
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was going to say that, you very much like, you know, there are a lot of options that you all throw into the storyline, you know. I mean, you bring in the time travel, the crime noir, and there's even like some of the scenes that like the noir goes as far to almost look like shots from Citizen Kane or something, like, you know, with a lot of the highlighting, or Maltese Falcon or something like that. Who brought all those ideas to the table, though, is what I'm kind of getting at. Like, between you and Paul and Tim, too.
No, Paul and I.
So what movies at the time, or where were your, like, direct influences coming from then?
Oh, well, no, so the story is that, you know, when we grew up in the 60s as kids, and my story was I would fake sick and stay home for like a week at a time and just watch all old movies.
Nice.
Because that's all they showed during the day. Reagan, pay no attention to that story. It cannot be done in the modern world. Parents are smart. So in my era, you could do, I really got the flu. Okay, you know, and I would just lock myself in my room, and I'd watch Bogart and Cagney, Gary Cooper in particular. I love Capra movies. And when Paul and I met in college, we had all the same references. He did the same thing. Not that he faked sick, but he knew all the old movies. And literally, I remember going to the library and getting out the 16 millimeter projector and screening the Maltese Falcon for ourselves. You know, in an afternoon during college. So, and then when we met Thomerson, same thing. He had all the same old movie references. But Trancers absolutely is us. It's absolutely us. And my reference about Legendary remaking it without us was kind of like, wow, okay. But the essence of it is I'm still here. You know, I could help. You know, it's like, I don't know what they'll do or if it ever get made or whatever. But that happens to us a lot. It happened with the Flash TV show, too. We never got even one episode. And I talk about it all the time because I think it's silly.
Well, that's what I'd seen that on the Glassman podcast. You had mentioned that because you talked about the original 22 episodes that you had done of The Flash, and how when you had reached out to propose writing for the new episode that they just kind of blew you off.
I said, one episode? It's like, come on, you guys. It's like, if you love our stuff that much, it's just kind of a head scratcher for me, not one episode. But, you know, at the end of the day, Paul and I, before he passed, we were watching. There was an episode where they did what we did for other people, which was ironic, and they said, oh, they're on the corner of Bilson and De Meo or something, and it was on a monitor, and somebody told me, so I said, well, let's watch the episode. So we sat there. He was fighting cancer at the time. We sat on his couch and watched it. And honestly, it was like, you know, I said, Paul, we did our Flash. This isn't our Flash. No, we did our Flash. We made our creative statement exist in those 22 episodes, which is really well liked by lots of people, including the people who make this show.
Yeah.
Because they use our characters, they use our logos, they recreate sets, you know, they reference it, it's Earth 90 or whatever it is. So, you know, it's not our show.
Well, you all have written.
I mean, I had an idea. I wanted to do one where their Flash goes to Earth 90 and has to reactivate all our people who've kind of given up. You know, and just a classic Last Hurrah kind of thing that wouldn't break their timeline or anything. But I didn't get any traction. So that's here or there. That's never happened. Nobody's ever invited us back on anything. Not the Rocketeer, not the Flash, not Trancers. Well, were we talking about Trancers now?
Well, no, but I am interested about Trancers. You left at Trancers in? Because I was curious. I was going to ask you about what happens with all the follow-ups, because there are a shit ton of sequels.
What happened. I don't know if I've ever told this story exactly.
Oh, well, that's good. I like the stories that are untold. Tell us those.
This is just Empire stuff. Maybe I told it. I don't know. But what happened at Empire was we wrote Trancers. Charlie directed it. Charlie loved it. I think he loved doing it. I would guess if you asked Charlie, he'd probably say it's he should say it's his favorite film.
Why does Mnuchin get credit in this?
He was at AD. He wasn't the director.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead.
He directed Eliminators.
Yeah.
Which was way over scope for the budget. So Zone Troopers was the deal, right? That was the one you get to direct. But
All right.
it was also the first movie that Charlie tried to make in Italy. So we were over there like...
You actually shot that in Italy?
Yeah, we were over there like 2 or 3 of us, or 4 of us. Paul and I, and at first it was just Paul and I on a plane, and some Italians that he hooked us up with. And then the money wasn't coming, and then they were turning on us like, well, no check, no movie. You know, it was like that. And then Charlie and his dad showed up with the money at some point, and then we shot the movie. And this experience was phenomenal. I mean, even though I'm selling, that was a scary part, but it was one of the great experiences of my life, making Zone Troopers in Rome with my friends, because we were all friends from Trancers.
Yeah, I mean, you had Van Patten in there, because I know you worked with Van Patten quite a bit as well.
No, that's where we met Tim, was Zone Troopers.
So that's where Tim, the first time you worked together with Tim is there?
Yeah, but it was Thomerson, LaFleur, and Biff Maynard. And Biff Maynard grew up with Tim in San Diego.
All right.
And as a stand-up comic. And if you get into their history, there's some really crazy stories in the 70s of them and the Comedy Store and stuff. But so they all went to Italy. We were all friends already, and so we wrote Zone Troopers, and we took all the guys we knew from Trancers, basically. And Tim Van Patten was the new guy in the group. When we went on to do The Wrong Guys later, then that was the second one he did with us, where he wasn't the new guy anymore. But Thomerson was there again. So back to Trancers. So we created that, wrote it, loved it. Charlie loved it. I remember everything about it was pretty positive in a sense. I mean, I know we wanted it to be pastebasket. Who cares? The writers are always cranky. After that, we went and made Zone Troopers in Italy. And after we came back, I would say, you know, our stuff, Trancers, somehow we got away with it because Charlie directed it and really liked it, and it got some respect, and people tended to like it because of the humor. But our stuff was pretty not really respected because it wasn't exploitive. So it wasn't traditional Empire stuff because it wasn't guts flying all over the place or crazy demonic stuff. It was somebody was letting us make movies. They had certain needs in the sort of genre area. And we were trying to make the movies we wanted to make because somebody was letting us make movies, and we stayed within the framework as much as we could. But Zone Troopers, in my opinion, they didn't understand it at all. And when I came back, they didn't let me edit it. Charlie's dad, Albert, cut it.
All right.
And that was a huge problem, and it affected my next movie because I didn't learn how to edit. And I thought you could cut paste in the editing room, and I didn't get to learn you can't.
Yeah.
So I went out on The Wrong Guys and didn't crank the pace up on the set like I wish I had. So and also he cut a scene out of Zone Troopers that bothers me to this day. It was the set. Remember when Mittens punches Hitler? If you've ever seen the movie.
Yeah, we've both seen it, yeah. Reagan's actually watched it very recently.
Yes.
Okay. So there's a scene in there, as you know, where Mittens, who is Jewish, punches Hitler in the face. And I'll never forget when we were writing it, how many zillion years ago, when I came up with that idea, Paul's like, no way, that is so stupid. We are not doing that. And I always think sometimes the best ideas always get resisted at first because they're so out there. But that's my favorite thing in the movie. But what the problem was, there was a scene earlier in the movie that it was cut out where Mittens tells the story of that he was a boxer and he killed a guy in the ring and he's never hit a guy since and he can't. So when he punches Hitler, it's got like 3 times the juice.
Yeah. You're wondering what the hell's going on when he hits Hitler now instead.
As a screenwriting professor, which is one of my jobs, I point out that Reagan is smiling because Reagan understands, with her expertise, that there's something called a setup and a payoff in a screenplay. So he took my setup away, and the payoff was pretty good, but it would have been better with the setup.
Yeah.
And I'm still, even though God rest his soul, and I really liked Albert Band a lot, he was a really good guy, I'm still not okay with it. I'll just say right now, I'm not okay with it. If I could ever get a director's cut of Zone Troopers, which I can't.
Well, you can cut it and just watch it at home. You know, what do you cut in now?
I have a VHS of the rough cut that looks all crappy that has that scene in it.
Well, when you cut back then, I mean, now if we cut, like, say I've cut some stuff, I use like Avid Media Composer and stuff, you know, something like that. But back then, processing and things of that were a little bit more complicated. So I don't know anything about
film editing. it was film. There was no digital editing at Empire when I was there. In those days, that was just moviolas and cutting and splicing. So, but when we came back from Zone Troopers, I will say that the movie was not. They released it and everything, and nobody was like in our face like it sucks or you did a bad job. But there was no excitement for us to go make another movie.
All right.
And because all of a sudden he spent a lot. All of a sudden he invested in Italy, bought a studio, and Danny and Paul never got to go back. And I think about 18 months of that. And at the same time, people started seeing Trancers and our Zone Troopers, and we were pitching The Rocketeer, and we were hustling. And next thing you know, we had an overall deal. We had a deal to write a pilot at Warner Brothers called Salem, which is very much like Lucifer, that show now. But this is in 1986. Mm-hmm. And after we wrote that, they said, wow, these guys are good. We'll give them an overall deal. We did Kung Fu and The Next Generation at Warner Brothers in that 87.
Well, that's what I was going to ask about Kung Fu. You were going to ask a question real quick that might lead into this. Go ask him that one real quick.
Okay, so at some point in the mid to late 80s, you and Paul established a production company called Pet Fly and went to work in television. What led to this?
So what led to it was, how come all these other guys are going back to Italy and make movies, and we're still sitting here in this office? We think we're as good or better than these other guys, and they're doing what we really enjoyed, and now they want us to write Ghoulies 2, and we're not even putting our name on it. So at the same time, we wrote this pilot, Salem, because people started seeing Trancers.
Yeah.
So I'll tell you, here's what really happened. If we're on our career, because I was still stuck in Empire Land. When we came back, Jim Cameron saw Trancers at the American film market, okay? Which we were like, oh shit, Terminator came out while we were making Trancers. We didn't know of the similarities. We had no idea that they were both about a guy from the future coming to the present.
Oh, so this is just complete ironic landing. I was going to ask about that because I know there's a lot of comparisons.
Yeah, no, we didn't know. We shot Trancers in the summer of '84. The movie Terminator came out while we were shooting. Yeah. So it wasn't like, and we didn't know what it was. We didn't know anything about it. But ironically, when we came back from shooting Zone Troopers in spring of '85, we got a call from Lloyd Levin, who was a young development guy at Fox, who worked for Larry Gordon and Scott Rudin, I think, is in the news now. And I think it was Scott Rudin.
Okay.
And that Jim Cameron told them that he saw Trancers at the AFM, and that Danny and Paul, Bilson and De Meo are the next guys coming out of B movies. You guys should go find those guys. So Lloyd found us. Now, can I just jump ahead 30 years and say, if you look at the Five Bloods.
You still work with Lloyd, right? He pitched the Five Bloods when it was the last tour, right?
Still working with Lloyd to this day.
Yeah.
I'm working with Lloyd on our next movie, or our next 3. So he calls up. I remember the meeting distinctly at Fox, and he says, Cameron told us we should find you guys. And what do you want to do? At the same time, while we were at Empire, we had to come up with a lot of ideas to write 7 movies. And in the Empire days, there was also scripts that weren't made. They're now have these weird cult legends like Decapitron. The reason they have legends is because Charlie made posters of all of them. So there was some exposure. Journeys Through the Dark Zone, Decapitron. What were some? I think we wrote 7 movies. I just can't remember. We also wrote a Trancers 20-minute short.
That was going to ask. You did something that was like a follow-up that wound up being released as like a segment of Pulse Pounders in 2013, right? How do you feel about that?
I was happy with our 20-page script. I think it's okay. I mean, I think it was a little constrained, I would say.
Okay.
It seemed to, I thought it was okay. It didn't have the scope. It seemed like what I remember about it is they tried to stuff it in a couple rooms. And that's what was hard about it, because Trancers has LA and running around, and that was made in Italy, so they stuffed it into a couple sets. I think we had to write it for a couple sets. That was the last thing, one of the last things we wrote at Empire. And then Ghoulies 2 was we took our name off that. It says written by Charlie Dolan. If you know, Charlie Dolan is a character in Zone Troopers. So
why'd you pull your name off of it? Just didn't want to claim it?
Thought it was shitty. Yeah. But the truth is, there was a screening years ago of Eliminators at the Beverly Cinema in LA.
All right.
And it was packed, and people were laughing. And I remember standing up and saying, "Hey, we knew this sucked then. It's not like this sucks because it's old and funny. We thought it was bad then, the Mandroid. You know, we thought this stuff was, and they were kind of like, oh wow. It was like they couldn't imagine that we knew it sucked then. You know what I mean? It was more like we thought we were making epic sci-fi. No, we knew what worked and didn't work.
Yeah.
You know, Trancers worked, Eliminators didn't work because Eliminators was way over scoped for the budget, and they had all kinds of problems shooting in Spain, and they had never. That's the only movie they made in Spain, so it was like a one-off. It wasn't part of Charlie's Machine. He had going in Italy later on. Arena was part of that.
Arena got tanked in the Empire. Sorry, I mean to interrupt you, but Arena got tanked with the whole Empire drop too. Is there a link with this and Vestron going down and all of that? Because when I was talking with Courtney about Class of '99, all that shit kind of went down the same tube. It sounds like at the same time.
That was later. That was way later. So there was Vestron money. Then there was crazy. We knew there was weird crap with money going on over there. That was mostly after we left. It was getting weird when we left. Because we left at the end of 86. Like December of 86 is when we left Empire. Stuart Gordon was across the hall from us. He did Reanimator, and then he had done Robojocks. And again, we're sitting there doing nothing. And that was why we're really loyal, but he was not letting us make movies. And if we weren't going to make movies, and we'd written our 7, it's kind of like, and Warner Brothers, look, we just had better offers. But the important point of my story I didn't get to is that we were originally in this little crappy office on Fairfax near Melrose.
All right.
And we would walk down to the Golden Apple comic book store. And that's where we, in the 80s, I discovered comics on a different level. And Paul was always kind of a comic head when he was a kid. I was a little different than him. But American Flag, The Rocketeer, Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen. Those were like seminal and like kind of blew our minds. We read a lot of other stuff that were in that 80s kind of writing for an older audience comics.
Well, you got hung up in that ready to write Watchmen at some point, didn't you? With Roger Rabbit 2, and you were talking about all that at some point.
So out of that, The Rocketeer, it was just stuff we really liked. I'll talk about The Rocketeer and then I'll talk about Arena because there's a relationship in a way.
Okay.
I guess I'll talk about Arena because it was in a relationship to Trancers, and then I'll go to The Rocketeer because that's part of when we left Empire.
All right.
But look, our first meetings with Dave Stevens were at Empire, or on The Rocketeer.
Mm-hmm.
So, and it was Zone Troopers. Okay, here I go. I'll just do it. And then just remind me to get back to Arena. Okay?
No, you're fine. Okay, I'll bring us back on course when we need to. You do your thing.
Okay. So, with The Rocketeer, we found the original books before they were gathered into a graphic novel. And we were like, this is our stuff. Because if you know from Trancers and everything I'm talking about, we were old movie heads.
Mm-hmm.
So we found out that Steve Miner, director who did that movie House, you might recall.
Okay.
A very nice guy. A lot of people I know used to work with him. Had the rights, but they were expiring. And when we came back from doing Zone Troopers in Italy, we got a hold of Dave Stevens, and we had him come over to our crappy office at Empire, which was now on La Brea,
All right.
overlooking the street. It's now like a gym. It's been a gym for like 10 years, but our office was there. We gave him our pitch for what we wanted to do with The Rocketeer. And what I remember clearly was 2 things. We showed him some of Zone Troopers and production designs and stuff. And like, he couldn't believe how we were into the same crap he was, like 1930s, 40s pulp stuff. He couldn't believe it. Then we pitched him that we wanted to have the Creeper in the Rocketeer movie.
Okay.
Rondo Hatton. And he was like, I've always wanted to do the Creeper. And out of this sort of mind meld where he realized that Paul and I were sort of cut from the same cloth and loved the same stuff, we didn't have any money, but he gave us an option on the Rocketeer that was free. Like, we didn't have money to pay him. But for the next 6 years, until the movie was made, it was just friendship and good faith with Dave Stevens. And in the course of that time, we wrote Cliff Goes to New York with Dave, the second series of Rocketeer books.
Okay.
Paul and I wrote most of those with him.
I didn't know about that. That's interesting.
Yeah, because you got to see our names in the thank you credits because we didn't really get writing credit on it. And we didn't really care because we thought the art was so much more important in those days. That also, whatever Dave wanted to do was fine with us. But we wrote a lot of that. And over that period, and different directors and scripts on The Rocketeer, once it was at Disney, we never had paid Dave Stevens for an option. got paid when Disney optioned it. We went around town together, Paul, Dave, and I, pitching our version of the Rocketeer movie to everybody in town until Touchstone at the time bought it.
And did they? I've read. And this is I was curious to ask you about this. I've read, obviously about the back and forth with Disney and you and Paul getting thrown around in the screenwriting stuff on the Rocketeer, but I've read also that they wanted the name was really that they wanted to kind of just take the whole concept and then do what they wanted with it. Do you feel like the end result of the actual film was?
That's not true at all.
So how did it play out in reality?
We pitched The Rocketeer, which was an adaptation of the comic book story, right? And if even in the movie, you'll notice that the first time the Rocketeer flies is pretty much like it was in the comic. It's actually my favorite part of the movie because it's the most faithful to the original. We pitched that, and that version we pitched and worked back and forth on is basically what the movie is. And we wrote on it. And in those days, it was very traditional, especially at Disney, for, okay, now let's get a draft from Jim Kauff. So Jim Kauff did a draft. And then I remember it coming back to us, and we read his draft. And I remember evolving that he contributed one really great joke to the movie. That big gopher joke was his idea. I don't remember anything else really being from him in that. And then Frank Darabont did some work on it. Now, we knew Frank because, looping back, Frank was an assistant art director on Trancers. And I remember standing around the set with Frank of Trancers just bullshitting when we were young. So now Frank is, how many years later is that? It's not even that many, like 5 or 6 years later. He's rewriting us.
All right.
And we were busy doing The Flash at the same time. So we were so busy with The Flash that there was no issues with us of what was going on with The Rocketeer. But we always knew because we were very close with Lloyd and the producers because we originated the project. And we were friends. We were all friends. And so there was Bill Deere was a director we developed with and wrote with for a while. That's why he has story credit on the movie. He's got some ideas in there. And then what was cool was once they were going to make the movie, Larry and Chuck Gordon and Lloyd Levin said to Disney, you got to put Danny and Paul back on this. We don't need any more writers. You bring back the original writers to pull it together. So we were the last writers on The Rocketeer also, which was highly unusual. It's unusual in general, but in that era, it was highly unusual at Disney. And I credit Chuck and Larry and Lloyd for fighting for us. Anyway, so we finished the movie, and we did rewrites on the set when we could and ran out to the set. But we were doing The Flash at exactly the same time. So that was a wild time, and I was directing too. Now, to rewind back to Arena was another one of our Charlie wants to do wrestling in space with aliens, and he sold a poster. And it's like, well, what the hell are we going to do with that? So what we locked into, of course, was an old movie, Body and Soul, a John Garfield boxing movie.
All right, I haven't seen it.
Okay, it's classic. And we did Body and Soul in space with creatures, but it was like all of our old shit was like, now that I think about it, a lot of our old stuff was like old movies. And it was like Body and Soul in space. So it was like The Rocketeer in space. There were guys who, hey, gee whiz, man, but I thought it was one of our best scripts at Empire. And the problem was nobody there really got the joke. They thought we got to make a hard science fiction movie about wrestling in space and all the characters and the humor and the weirdness. Now, it's still in there, but it's horribly executed. And as I recall, Erwin Yablans rewrote us himself. And I remember going, ugh, he just messed the script up, took all the fun out of it. And then when they made it, look, Pete did 2 of our movies. Pete's a really nice guy and is a strong logistical director. But I don't think comedy's his thing. And both Arena and Eliminators were dependent on a lot of comedy to work. This is like me 30 or 40 years later looking back at this. It's not that foggy, to be honest. It's like I still see this stuff like it's right there.
Yeah.
And it's just, he had a lot of skills, and just standing all that stuff up with no money is one of Pete's major skills. But comedy, I don't think was his thing, because it's just kind of erratic in both of those pieces. And then Erwin Yablans was in there. They were trying to make our silly stuff serious. That's what it was. They were trying to make, because Zone Troopers is the same. But I made that, and Paul made that, so that's got our tone. But whenever you take our scripts and then try to make them more serious, you get Arena.
But the Arena ended up being like a PG-13 film, though, as well. Was it written more of an adult crowd?
You know what? I maybe saw it once. I have a poster. I thought it was crap. I mean, to be honest, it's like, Paul and I have some standards, believe it or not, and it's like some of those things, crap is crap, and we would call crap then. I mean, it's not. That's what I'm saying. It's like, I think it's very important, and it's very important with my students too, is to be able to be self-critical and always understand and be willing to call out clearly what good from bad is. It's the only way you can get to good in any creative form. If you start lying to yourself. So yeah, I've made shitty stuff, but I don't think, and I know this, I was saying to somebody else the other day, because I'm writing a lot these days. I don't write a bad script. It might not sell, it might not be the greatest, but I can't write a bad script because I know the difference.
That is said. I know you mentioned a theater, and you said, Ed, that you had a lot of your students over, that you would spend some time in your theater, and that you were writing with other people, especially since Paul had passed, and with the work on The Five Bloods, that you were working to be able to develop another script or screenplay that was that was kind of relevant to the culture and things that are going on in today's world. That seemed to be your guide. Is that your focus now with the 3 productions you're working on? 3 screenplays.
So that was the movie I was writing then. It's called Road Till Dawn. I wrote with a couple of I don't want to call them young writers, but newer writers. And it's based on the story of one of their dads and uncles who were the only black guys with a muscle car in East Texas in 1969. And it's kind of a black American graffiti. It's got a lot of Vietnam overtones. It's a drama. It's a family drama.
All right.
And I think it's great. So what's interesting, what's happened with that is, as of right now, we're putting it together. Kevin Wilmot, who is a co-writer on Five Bloods, and directed a great little movie called The 24th, which is out on streaming these days. He loves it, and he's come on. He wants to direct. So we're doing a real rewrite for Kevin right now. And then Lloyd is the producer, and the 3 of us with my writing partners, Ernest Crosby and Jonathan Simon, we're going to take it to market. And we're just doing a polish for Kevin right now. So that script is, in the culture, meaning that, it's about, it's a great drama. I think it's really cool. And then I also wrote recently, we wrote a comic called The Last Food Court about these black kids working in a food court in a mall that's shutting down. That's pretty funny. I wrote a sort of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea on a World War II submarine recently. It was more of a genre, back to the genre thing, but it's really an anti-war thing, and it's interesting. It's more psychological, like a Twilight Zone episode. Right now I'm writing with a couple of my partners, a couple of young women, based on one of their stories, where her mom had her run for state legislature when she was 23 in the south side of Chicago. That one's a lot of fun. I'm doing a lot of writing. I mean, I run the game department at USC, but I am doing a lot of writing right now, and this podcast is about writing. I'll tell you something really progressive. Tim Kring, who is the creator of Heroes, you probably remember that show.
Okay.
And he and I and another guy in Sweden, who's sort of the world's expert on live-action role-playing experiences, have been working for a couple of years on a new kind of company that extends stories beyond television and movie screens into, live events that extend into social media and some game elements, and really activating. It's really just next generation fan storytelling, right? With lots of integration with the creators. So I'm working, that's a project that the 3 of us have been working on, and I think, we're getting close to having a project to demonstrate that, which will be cool. I'm into a lot of stuff, but I'm doing a lot of writing. We're working with Tim and Christopher on that, and then I do run USC Games, which is the program at school between engineering and the film school.
Yeah, I know that you and Paul, you were at THQ for a while, right? Before I know there was some stuff
before that.
And, at EA before that, you and Paul wrote quite a few games together, and I know that The Sims was the big one that kind of was the namesake. But I'm not a huge gamer, so I'm not going to be pretentious here. But
but we did I was the creative exec on the first 4 Harry Potter games. I think.
Okay, yeah, definitely know.
One of those being Quidditch World Cup. Paul and I wrote pretty much most of that James Bond game Nightfire.
Mm-hmm.
And we also did some work on Agent Under Fire, and I think we laid out another one after that, after Nightfire. I forgot what it was called right this second. Was it Everything or Nothing? We laid out the basic plot, and then somebody else wrote. But yeah, we did some game stuff, but those were the ones we did the most. Paul did more because when I became executive, he was more of a head writer, especially at both EA and THQ.
Well, you teamed up for, you and Paul both did different things, like with Zone Troopers.
Didn't Paul produce it?
Yes, and Paul didn't direct. I directed. He never really wanted to. Maybe for a couple minutes he thought about it, but then he really didn't. Yeah, we would produce the stuff together. I directed probably 30 hours in the TV era, most of our pilots, and The Wrong Guys and stuff like that.
Well, I know The Wrong Guys seemed to be a big change of pace from your previous work, but what inspired you to write a comedy?
We thought we could. We love comedy, and we thought we could write a comedy, and we were at Thomerson. Okay, so we were working with Thomerson on the Empire stuff. Remember, he was a stand-up. Also, our manager, Joe Lauer, through a different set of events at the time, he really came from comedy. And he was really a comedy manager, and we were like his only drama guys, Paul and I.
All right.
And so that's how we got when we had the ideas to do The Wrong Guys, it was always about, again, man, the more I talk about this, I realize how it was just all old movies. So we wanted to do a comedy, like an old movie comedy, where, Abbott and Costello were called Bud and Lou in the movie. So they all had their own real names, and they were playing themselves, but the fictional version of themselves, just like Laurel and Hardy or W.C. Fields or any of that. And Joe Lauer had been Belzer's manager. So, we got Belzer on board, and somehow Richard Lewis signed up. But we actually picked the comics we want, and I remember we wrote the script for each of them. We talked to them first. I think that's what we did. Louis for sure.
When did Louis and John Goodman get involved? Because you have a hell of a cast on this. A lot of returns from other films you worked on, but a lot of you got Ernie Hudson in there. You got John Goodman. Where'd all these people?
John Goodman.
Talk to me about all this.
John Goodman was awesome. And Van Patten was from our old stuff. But definitely we wrote it for those actors to be their own sort of persona. And we knew Tim and Belzer. So we kind of watched their acts and stuff and wrote that nutty movie. Now, I always used to say about The Wrong Guys, and I never showed it to my friends. I haven't shown it to anybody in years because I always thought we blew it. But I think there was two factors of why we blew it on that movie. One was nobody told me that stupid wasn't funny.
Well,
and the other one is what I referenced earlier, which was I didn't get to edit Zone Troopers. So I didn't realize that you really had to speed up the pace on the set, especially in comedy, because it slows down in the theater. And after that, I learned it, and then everything else I did after that is they jam. But I didn't get to correct, because Zone Troopers is a little slow, and Wrong Guy is a little slow, because I didn't get to cut Zone Troopers. And I learned. But I'm ready to watch it again, The Wrong Guys. I haven't seen it in maybe 15, 20 years. I don't know. But I know it's kind of lame, but it's definitely, I always thought it would play well to kids, as a good...
With The Wrong Guys, I think that's a good perception of it, because that was the one thing that we both talked about when we watched it, was like, as a kid's film, the humor, I think, would hit right. I feel like where you're saying, where you said stupid isn't funny, the weird thing was that it was hard as the viewer to see were you given a shtick, it was hard to read into the satire of the whole thing. Like, there seemed to be some delibecy to it, which I think would play into where you're saying that it's almost would work well as a kid's movie, because there just seems some confused parts. However, John Goodman, himself, you cannot change that part. He's perfect as a villain for if you're 5 or 40. He's a great villain in that, especially when he shoots the pancakes and shit off the top and the flag is hilarious.
Well, I didn't even talk about how much fun it was to make that. So it was much funnier, I think, being in Wyoming with all those guys than what was on film. Because they were going at it off camera all the time. And also it was kind of how comics are, they're picking at each other. So it was always insulting each other. It was really funny. And there was weird stuff. We were up in the woods one night, And Richard Lewis, Larry David came out there and was visiting. So I think he was there for a couple nights up in Wyoming. He was visiting Richard Lewis.
All right.
There's
I was going
a
to ask why
weird
it was
story
out there.
behind that. I can't even remember. But John Goodman and I, and this part I'll never forget, we got into this crazy, weird, it's cold, it's the middle of the night, and we started walking around, and he would always like make sure his mouth was out of sync. Wait, make way, strongest man in the universe. That I remember just laughing and laughing while we were doing that. But it was also really funny stuff with, this is weird, but at one of the ones, Lewis, we get to the set, Richard Lewis, and go, oh my God, I had the most horrible experience last night. What? He said, I was talking to Louis on the phone because they were in condos in Wyoming, right? I was talking to Louis on the phone, and all of a sudden I heard a splashing sound, and I said, Lou, where are you? And Louis said, I'm in the tub. And Louis clicked, hung up the phone. It's like those guys were just at it. It was really funny. Now, the movie, I haven't watched it to even really have an intelligent conversation about it, except that it was absolutely based on our childhood, all that Cub Scout stuff. That was all, I saw a review of it recently because somebody had me do a podcast about The Wrong Guys, and I did an interview, and there was a lot of comments about what a baby boomer movie it is. Because that was our 1960s childhood shit in the first 10 minutes or 6 minutes of that movie, or 8 minutes, or whatever it is.
Yeah, when they're in the neighborhood and stuff.
But whatever, it didn't work. I didn't think it worked, and we never did another comedy until The Last Food Court, and that was after Paul passed away, and I had some really funny people I was writing with who knew a lot more about comedy than me. And I'm writing a comedy right now, and I think it's okay.
You seem on the fence about it. Or does your work in The Wrong Guys have you questioning yourself now?
Well, no, I'll be honest what it is. I'm the only... No, this is very tricky. Very tricky. I'm the only white writer on this.
Okay.
And it's all black. So that's why I'm having a little bit of a... Because cultural stuff you can't appropriate. You just can't. You either are it or you're not. And I'll get rewritten by some of my other partners. But as I originate stuff, this one I'm having... You know what? I'm just not as confident as I was in some other ones. It's a long story of why, and one of my partners died, and I'm working on that. The guy I wrote the submarine thing with is a guy named Christian Canamesa, who is he's a writer, but he's also a lead game designer. He did Red Dead Redemption, the first one.
Oh, shit, okay.
But he and I are going to do some big sort of genre-ishy thing next. So yeah, I'm working a lot and developing new stuff now. Really, my output is probably more than it's been in a really long time.
Well, I want to jump back real quick because I did have a question about Trancers again. With production, you were involved with production. You were on set, right? You all were there? Am I correct in that? What I'm picking
Trancers?
up? Yeah. Were you involved with production at all?
Well, involved, we'd hang out. You know what I mean? Involved. We couldn't walk up to Charlie and say, pick up the pace on this scene.
But yeah.
You know what I mean?
What do you mean by hanging out then? Y'all just kind of had to watch it go down?
Well, it was shot during the Olympics. Here's what was cool. It was shot during the 84 Olympics. And legendarily, everybody was out of LA, so there was no traffic. You could drive anywhere.
Yeah.
And I remember being on the set often on Trancers. Maybe we were there every day, maybe not. I think we were. I don't know why, because it was our first movie. Yeah, we were on the set. There's a great picture of Paul and Charlie and I in front of this Mom's Number 3. That was actually a 3D picture. So, we were on the set a lot. Did we contribute to the production? I know we were in the casting sessions, and I'm sure we said we like them or we don't like them. And we had a lot to do with getting, it was our first one, but we were around. I can't say we had influence on it. We did on the art and stuff. Definitely remember the meetings with the art department and trying to, all this stuff, this Blade Runner-y stuff. That was all us.
I want to ask you something because I know this year, or last year per se, was a big year with you with The Five Bloods. This was originally a screenplay that you and Paul wrote called The Last Tour. Now, elaborate on is there some relationship with John Milius? I know that when he wrote Apocalypse Now, he's a big influence for you and Paul. And you mentioned that, I know that the Apocalypse Now bar is even in the movie.
That's a real place that we got.
It's like one of the oldest bars in the area, isn't it? Like, it's been there for a long time. It's pretty quintessential.
Been there since '79, since right after the movie came out. It's been there forever. But we got that out of research.
Well, how did that factor into writing the screenplay? Your influences with Milius and you grew up in that generation at the time. I know with the podcast with Glassman, you talked about a lot of guys coming back to Cal State, where you and Paul were at the time, from Vietnam and stuff. So there's a lot of things that are in the mix here.
Right. We went to school with Vietnam vets. We grew up with the war. I was the last year to register for the draft. Paul was the last year where they called numbers, and he didn't get called. But they did numbers, but they weren't drafting in 71. And I was like 74. But when we got to college, it was guys coming back from the war. And so our dorms were full of vets. But so there was always a close relationship to the war. Milius, we as young writers we were fans of his in college, like The Wind and the Lion in particular, Apocalypse Now, absolutely, but I think that came out after college because we were working as extras. And that's a whole story about when we were in 1941, there was a screening of Apocalypse Now. 6 months before it came out, it was a cut that he was showing in Westwood. And me, and it was Mickey Rourke and Paul and I, Bobby DeChico. But we were all working on these scenes in 1941 as extras. It was like, hey, they're showing Apocalypse Now. We all kind of met down there. And the actors, and because Paul and I people were kind of nice to us because we were friendly, and everybody knew we wanted to be writers and were working and struggling. So the actors were, they weren't off. They wouldn't push us away. Like John Candy even invited us to his house once, and he talked to us about writing and all. People were really nice to us then. Anyway, we went to that screening. So Milius in 1980 taught a class at this thing called the Sherwood Oaks that they used to have in Hollywood, where you could pay like $100 for 8 classes and anybody could go.
Okay.
And I think there was maybe 100 people in there, and he gave us his script of Conan. He was about to go shoot Conan. He gave us his first draft of Apocalypse Now. I was a massive Apocalypse Now fan. I thought it was like the greatest movie ever made. It's one of my top movies for sure still. So Milius, we had this class with Milius, and it was the only writing class that Paul and I ever had.
Okay.
And we learned 2 key things in there that I still teach to this day. And one is write the movie you want to see the most. And the other is the screenwriter must practice the Bushido code of the samurai, who always contemplates death. So in the face of death, he has no fear. Meaning, don't ever think you're selling anything. Just know it's not going to work. And then when it does, it does. But always be prepared for the worst. Really. And I still use the write the movie you want to see the most. After a big stint in the game industry and going back to screenwriting, and I was pretty angry about how the game industry stuff ended, and I was feeling like our generation is never going to be able to retire. And out of that energy came, and I wanted to write a Vietnam movie forever. And Milius, by the way, we worked with Milius before we wrote The Last Tour. We had worked with him in the game business, which was opportunities I had to hire him and work with him. So Paul and I had partnered with him a few times, and we were working on this game called Homefront when John had a stroke, when we were about to go do PR. And Paul and I had visited him quite a few times after that. And he really was like, our only writing professor and mentor. So I always wanted to write a Vietnam movie, found a way to get at it. It wasn't so Treasure of Sierra Madre. It was a little more Milius-esque in the first draft. Because in the first draft, Stormin' Norman, if you will, was actually still alive. And more like Colonel Kurtz. He was like living with bandits and was a crook that had kind of taken the crime of the war out on the land, on the place, so to speak. So he was just a fucked up guy. Then when Oliver Stone picked it up, we were with Lloyd the whole time, but he got it to Oliver Stone, and we worked on it with him for a while. He specifically said, I really want it more like Treasure of Sierra Madre. And the ending and...
That seems kind of down your alley. I mean, old movies. Treasure of Sierra Madre is definitely a classic to roll.
We all knew we were talking about it. So we were aware of Treasure of Sierra Madre when we wrote it. It's just, it wasn't. They wanted more. So we changed the third act. And then he decided he didn't want to make it, and he gave it back. And we rewrote it again to put it where we wanted, and that's what Spike got. And then Spike and Kevin rewrote it and turned it into the Five Bloods.
Well, I was going to ask, what was it like working with another writing team?
They just rewrote us. Like, they didn't look back. It was theirs at that point. What was cool about the experience was afterwards, we re-engaged, or I did, it was after Paul passed away, with Spike and Kevin around the movie coming out. And that's when we really became friends and talked about it a lot more, was after they made the movie. They've really, Spike in particular, has really been super respectful of The Last Tour and the original script, and how much that script is The Five Bloods. So, you know, I mean, they added a lot and took away and changed some things, but it's a pure collaboration among the four of us. And that's how it's credited. So I feel good, really good about that. Really proud of the movie. And in particular, you know, Paul's last wish was he said, I just want one more credit. Because Paul had seen their rewrite 2 weeks before he passed away. And we were actually working on our notes to send back to them when he died. So, and his last wish really was one more credit. And it was achieved really nicely, and posters all over town and even t-shirts and stuff. So it's cool. Really, really happy about the Five Bloods, especially for Paul. And
I mean, you along with him nominated for original screenplay with Chicago's Film Critics Association, right? With Spike Lee and Kevin too.
Yeah, no, we got a few nominations here and there. I think it was under-nominated, in my opinion, for its quality.
I'd agree.
Why? Who cares? Like, we didn't make it for awards. We really made it for the vets. We really did. From our first draft to honor those guys, and so it succeeds. And, you know, a lot of people have seen that movie because of Netflix, right? A lot. So the consciousness raising of Vietnam and the Black GI, and I was really happy that Delroy Lindo said in an interview, he said, all vets of all colors come up to me and tell me how much they feel about that movie. And in our original version, it was like 3 white guys and a black guy. And the character that's Paul, the Delroy Lindo character, he was always racist in art. He was the one who was shitty to the black guy in the old version. The characters were kind of the same. Paul's character is the same. What they added, they did a lot. Most of their work, which was phenomenal, was around the Chadwick Boseman stuff. That was great. They really beefed that up in the flashbacks and stuff.
What did you think about how they shot it in the Super 8mm? Some of the flashback sequences. That's some pretty wild shit there.
Cool.
Yeah,
I love that. I love goes widescreen and you know, Spike. I think it's a great Spike Lee joint. That's what I think about it.
I mean, you know,
I'm really proud of it. That and The Rocketeer become the Bilson De Meo jewels in the crown. I'm hoping before I'm done, I can pop a couple more in there, feature-wise, but we'll see.
It's a long film. One thing when I was watching Da 5 Bloods, it seems for a Bilson and De Meo script, it's really intricate. And I know maybe the budget meets here. And as it did with The Rocketeer, where you talk about in the earlier days, you seem like you both kind of had a vision to make the movie that you wanted to make, and it sounded like the budget constraints and at Enterprise and with Band at the time kind of held you back. The intricacies of the film here, where they transition, especially the part where, as soon as Eddie blows up and it sits you right the fuck up in your seat. Were there any, the components put in as far as the story being linear? Is that all you and Paul?
The basics, we got first position credit because it's basically, the first 2 acts in particular are basically our script, but it's a collaboration. And I think it tells a great story. Your question about length, it was not a long script. So that's the filmmaking. That's Spike's choices.
Well, did you enjoy the film?
So, I mean, it was really, yeah, you know what, I particularly love the first 20 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. I love the first 20 minutes. Where it starts with the Marvin Gaye and the news footage, and then the guys in the hotel, and then the Apocalypse Now club, and then the flashbacks. That stuff it feels like movie going hard, in the first half hour. I really, really, really dig that.
So, moving forward, we'll wrap things up here in a second. You've got some new things out on the table now, like you said, and you're still teaching screenwriting as well. What is your position at USC exactly? Tell me about that. Your position currently.
Yeah, I'm the chairman of the Interactive Media and Games Division of the School of Cinematic Arts, as well as the director of USC Games, which is the joint program with the Viterbi School of Engineering. That's my job. And then I'm writing a lot right now, mostly features, although I think we may be, just after a meeting this morning, I'm developing a big historical epic TV thing with also lots of storytelling extensions beyond TV. That's kind of where I'm at these days. How do I take all these pieces of my career and sort of invent new ways of storytelling bigger?
TV. been a long time. What's the medium changed now? How is the approach now as to what it was when you were working on it back in the late 80s, early 90s?
Oh, totally. It's easy to speak to. The primary thing is serialized. I always liked serialized. I always liked what used to be the miniseries when I was young, when that's all it was, you know, like Roots or something.
Yeah.
Now all shows are like that. So that's a different, that requires a writer's room and, you know, consistent story and everything, but I enjoy it more because I like that kind of storytelling. I'm watching, you know, during COVID, I've gotten to watch a lot of stuff, and right now I'm catching up on a show called The Last Kingdom on Netflix that I just love. I think it's fantastic. The Expanse I caught up with. You know, a lot of these shows where there's 40 or 50 episodes, I've been seeing a lot of stuff and watching some comedy. But I dig the big serialized TV stuff. And in our day, you couldn't, because the shows would go to syndication and you couldn't guarantee that they would air in the proper order once they were syndicated. That's why we didn't do serialized shows back in the day. It's because you didn't know in the order of episodes once they got out into the syndicated market back in the old days.
So, but you know, that leads me to asking about Human Targets then. You know, because you and Paul, you mentioned, you know, that anytime you get behind a camera, you would. And how, you know, when you were developing stuff back then, do you think that sort of, you know, working on serials now, if you go to write something this way, will it factor in differently as far as your approach?
Yeah, because you have to break the whole story for the season, because it's like everybody else. In those days, you could do one story at a time. And like on the Sentinel, we had some mythology, and we'd go, okay, it's a mythology episode, and we'd move sort of the big meta story along. But they were one-offs. Each episode was its own movie, and now it's not like that at all. So I think it's much better. I'm more of a fan of that. I prefer to watch that. So I'm happy interested to do it. I'm more interested in features, but whatever happens, you know. I just want to tell stories. Honestly,
you ever thought about book writing, or this is a naive question.
Too many words.
I hear you. What about, how do you write a video game? This is a kind of a peculiar question. What goes into writing the storyline for that? I mean, I could assume the obvious.
Well, it depends on what it is, but generally, you just start at the highest level with the basic story tenets of what does the protagonist want, what does the antagonist want, what are the stakes, and then where it diverges is sometimes. It's not usually branch. Everybody thinks a video game is like branching stories. It's not. It's more emergent storytelling, or you build linear threads where somebody's going through, and then sometimes where it's map-based, then you'll put different mini-stories on the map. They can hit a different order. But still, no matter what you're doing in a game, moment to moment, you're still using all the basic techniques of storytelling, you know? Yeah. Conflict. Right? Why do we care? What are the stakes? You know, that kind of stuff. It's just, but it's not branching narrative. That's not really what game writing is. Some game writing is like that, not that much. The general thing, here's what I appreciate is that, you know, Paul and I worked together for 40 years or 42 years or something, or 40, you know, something like that. And it's the story you're telling is mostly his body of work. And then what I do beyond that, we'll see what happens, right? I'm working on it hard right now. But it's cool. It's really great to have you guys here saying, oh, yeah, we've been looking at your stuff for a week. That's pretty nice. You know, I appreciate that.
You kind of have, in the way that you described your relationship a little bit, too, when you were talking with Glassman, and even earlier when you said you would talk about things and Paul would write it down, and you guys had a very brother back and forth. Your age is a little similar, but you have very much a Brackett Wilder feel from what I'm getting. You know, you don't see a lot of writing teams in today's world paired off like they would have been in the early studio days, you know, and you also, you know, coming from background in Hollywood, I mean, you even have like family, like wasn't your grandfather worked at movie trailers at RKO back in the day? So this has kind of been something in your background for a long time. How is that factored into when you and Paul began to work together?
It was a family business, so, it wasn't like Hollywood, that's impossible. I'm just wasting none of that. It was more like, you do this, you do that. It was naive, but it was like, hey, this is how it works. We do this and that, and we work. But because my dad was a freelance director, he wasn't grounded in any show where he could ever like hire his son. Honestly, it was like that. So he might have gotten us into pitch a couple times, but nobody took us seriously because we were somebody's son. So we really did it the way I said, through extra work to camera assistant to Empire to just hustling the scripts. The thing that was, I didn't say, it was coincidental, was Paul's wife, girlfriend at the time, was Richard Pryor's assistant, was hired to be his personal assistant. So it was kind of like, Richard was like, hey, Lauren, your boyfriend's basically a kid writer I can hire for cheap to do something in 3 weeks, right? And she was like, yeah. And so we'll get Paul over here. And Paul and Danny showed up, and that was how we did that Richard Pryor movie. It was because he was just, who's some kids I can hire to do this crazy idea I have? And Paul's wife happened for 4.5 years, was his personal assistant. That's how that happened. So it's, stuff happens through relationships a lot, but our career was, the part about my family was, it just kept us from quitting. It made it seem like, oh yeah, we'll make it.
What about with
that was amazing.
The Jim Brown stories? Spike actually did a documentary on Jim Brown, right? But you have personal experience with Jim Brown too. Isn't it surrounding that same time with Pryor?
A
little bit. You guys went over there and pitched something or something, right?
There was a story with Jim Brown where Richard had us go up to Jim Brown's house to pitch, and Jim was going to tell us about how he wanted his character in the movie to be written, and that was very, very memorable. And then I was actually doing a project for the Hall of Fame. It was at the Super Bowl a couple years ago, and there was a big event. And Jim is like huge at the Hall of Fame because a lot of the players consider him the greatest player ever. And I walked up to him afterwards and I said, hey, do you remember? And he looked at me and he looked at me and he goes, do you look the same? I said, I doubt it. He said, well, I think you do. And it was just one of those where I hit him up about it, and I don't know if he really remembered or not, but he acted like he did. But that was memorable to see the scene with Jim Brown telling us how his character should be, and us just nodding our heads like we understood everything he was saying. That was funny.
We
had a lot of funny.
You mentioned Paul working as an extra on Blade Runner. Now, I can't remember his name off my head, and I'm not going to jump on a computer and look it up to be pretentious. The guy that gets killed in the very beginning, the first replicant. I'm watching The Wrong Guys, and I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? I've seen his face a million times.
So there's this. This is a reason for all this. So I didn't mention it because I didn't think we'd get back to Blade Runner, but Tim Thomerson, Biff Maynard, and Brian James were all friends when they were young in LA. I think Tim and Brian as actors, but Brian was also from Beaumont or Banning, which is like halfway to San Diego. Tim and Biff were from San Diego. They were also friends with Fred Dreyer, who I met through them. That was like guys they grew up with. And so Tim and maybe they were in the National Guard, but Tim and Biff and Brian were like friends. And so that's how they all wound up in The Wrong Guys. The Grunsky brothers were, hey, let's get Brian, let's get Biff. It wasn't like a normal movie. It was, let's get our friends and, write shit for them. It was crazy.
It sounds like y'all had a hell of a time on that one.
I guess we were really lucky.
You keep in touch with Belzer, or you keep
Those guys are funny.
You keep in touch with Tim at all, or talk to Tim at all now?
No, but if I ever run into him, Tim I talk to. But if the other ones, if I ever run into him, or like Paul would run into Richard Lewis, everybody seems to have great affection for the experience of that film. There's a Showtime documentary on the Comedy Store that's kind of like everybody who's in The Wrong Guys is in that, in the period and everything, and it really brought back a lot of memories. Now, our manager, Joe Lauer, was more wired into the Improv, which was the other bunch of comics in town. They kind of had different cultures, like which place did you work out at? So we were kind of into that while we were doing The Wrong Guys, but we were fans and trying to channel it into a comedy movie, and didn't. I gotta watch it again. I've been meaning to watch it again, so I have to.
Were you the one behind the camera on it? So it's shot well. I mean, I understand it's not congruent as far as the.
I directed it. I was trying to channel the Coen brothers a little bit. I remember, like, Raising Arizona was really big in my mind when I was directing that movie. But, I really think the pacing, there's a lot of things. Like I said, stupid isn't funny. So I have to see it again. It's probably better than I think. Because that's how all my stuff is. It's like, I think it's bad. And then I watch it and go, oh, that's better than I think it is.
Moving from the B films up into doing some of the stuff that you've worked on today and being all across the board with experience. Do you feel that that's had a big impact of strength as a screenwriter in your life? Now that you're teaching other people and that you're kind of working with people who are younger than you, where do you feel that your strengths as a screenwriter are posited in today's world to allow the people that you work with to be as effective as you have been?
Well, I have the opportunity to teach, so I don't just take it with me. I'm always teaching. And so I guess that's really the answer, is that I've been teaching for a long time, and a part of my life is passing on and refining my knowledge. But the refining of my knowledge, so I'm a much better writer than before I was teaching. I've learned a lot from my other screenwriting teaching partners and from co-teaching, and I never went to film school or writing school. So I'm a much better writer now than I was before I taught.
Well, we've been talking with Danny Bilson here, who has so many titles that we'd be selling you short if we just went to any one of them. But we've been talking to Danny Bilson about his film work with and screenplay work with Trancers, everything from Trancers to The Five Bloods, which basically goes from your first to your current. Thank you so much for coming on to the Ghost of Hollywood and spending time with us to talk today. We know you're very busy, so.
All right, great. Thanks a lot. Right. Take care, everybody.
Danny Bilson, everybody. Right here on the Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Poxy Leonard with Miss Ragan, and this has been another segment of Capsule Review. Again, thanks to Danny for joining us here on the show tonight, and we wish him the best of luck with his work going forward.
When we return, it's time for another session of the Cinematic Dumpster Fire. And on tonight's pile is Roger Corman's unreleased 1994 version of The Fantastic Four.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. All right, let's cue one up real quick. Here's one for you, wall crawlers.
Taking me back here.
That's right. This entire record is underrated in my opinion. Anyway, here's one of my favorite tracks by Alice Cooper, and it's definitely not one that you hear often. Who Do You Think We Are? Right here on the Ghost of Hollywood. Stay tuned. More with Cinematic Dumpster Fire when we return. We are. I'm machinery with a semi-automatic heart. I'm unclassified. I terminate, I tear apart. I'm always there when you think I'm not. I'm razor sharp and I'm white and hot. My famous squeezes off the final shot. Say goodbye. No integrity. No conscience, I'm just soul and blood. I'm insanity. I'm a camouflage boulevard. I don't some things I really can't describe. I make some miles over pretty wide. And I'm a licensed trained bona fide. Say goodbye. Special forces in an armored car. Who do you think we are? We don't care. We don't care. I'm carnivorous. Can't count the flesh that I've been through. Never sick of this. I'm red and white and black and blue. I'm always there when you think I'm not. I'm razor sharp and I'm white and hot. My finger squeezes off the final shot. Say goodbye. Who do you think we are? Special forces in an armored car. Who do you think we are? We don't care. We don't care.
terrifying, frightening, and out of control. When making movies goes wrong, there's one place for it. Welcome to the cinematic dumpster fire.
People don't usually remember after they get the check. They say, actually better. Stan Lee, for God's sake. He'll pretend now that it...
What? No, there's never made. Absolutely never. I would not allow that.
Oh, yeah? How many times did you visit the set of our film, Stan? You have a nice time? Yeah. He brought the donuts once. Okay?
A Fantastic Four movie in the works. It is not only in the works, it's just about finished. It'll be released sometime, I think, the end of this year. And I'm not expecting too much of it. It's the last movie to be made that we at Marvel had no control over. Our lawyers just gave the rights to Roger Corman to do the movie. There will be no other projects like that. Everything after that, we're doing ourselves.
And now we begin another segment of the Cinematic Dumpster Fire right here on the old Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Poxy Leonard with Miss Ragan, and tonight's tale is brought to you from the depths of Roger Corman's 1994 unreleased original film, The Fantastic Four.
While the story has become something of a legend, or maybe more of a conspiracy in the superhero comic/movie world, it never gets old to tell anyone who is hearing about it for the first time.
And as the old story goes, Bernd Eckinger's production company Constantin Film was trying to exercise an option they had to create a Fantastic Four movie before it expired at the end of 1992. I read that Eckinger tried to have Marvel grant him an extension. However, with no dice, some point he was left to scramble and find someone to produce the film independently on $1 million budget so that he would be able to retain the rights to that option.
Just to put things into perspective as to how small that amount is for a superhero movie, the 2005 film, which resulted after 20th Century Fox picked it up, ran on a production budget of somewhere around $100 million.
Originally, Eckinger approached Troma about it, but Kaufman was content with his own roster of action heroes and felt that the Fantastic Four would be wasted with his company. So Roger Corman agrees to do it instead, and pushes full speed ahead with production unknowingly, at least according to history so far, to inhibit the option expiring useless.
Production literally began on the 28th of December in 1992, and Ole Sasson was brought in to direct. Craig Nevius wrote a solid screenplay. The cast including Jay Underwood, Rebecca Staub, and Michael Bailey Smith was hired, and then it was off to the races.
Stan Lee even visited the set a few times, before publicly bashing it not long after, going so far as to promise that Marvel would control its own films going forward, despite the front he put up while he was on set with the cast and crew. And eventually things started to get weird. There's much more to it. I mean, this goes pretty deep and is never really resolved, but for the sake of time, I'm gonna have to jump to the end of production to continue this story.
There was basically no post, and the crew did its best to continue working to complete the film on their own. Despite the nil finances, things got worse when the special effects creator botched and then bails, leaving the crew to pick up the pieces the best they could by hiring another special effects editor.
Yeah, and around this time, the cast, who was also weary about what was going on behind closed doors, began to finance their own grassroots promotional campaign for the film, which was halted abruptly following a cease and desist order. And that would raise a ton of questions and eventually shed light on the whole ordeal concerning Eckinger's option expiration.
Now the twist. According to Stan Lee, there were never any plans to release the movie in the first place, and that had been created so that Eckinger would be able to legally retain the rights to the Fantastic Four option. Avi Arad even went so far to say that he had paid millions to secure prints only to have them destroyed.
And it never did see an official release. But at some point after Corman was bought out and the project moved over to 20th Century Fox, bootlegs started popping up at various conventions.
And oddly enough, this is where most of the cast and crew would actually become aware of the film's existence amongst the public.
In today's world, it's become a must-see for serious fans of the Fantastic Four, and is often favored over the later versions despite its overall campy aesthetic. Anyway, we're tight on time, so that'll have to wrap it up for our story on the 1994 disaster epic behind the unreleased action film, The Fantastic Four. Sorry we weren't able to do it more justice, but it's definitely easy to find and watch on YouTube, and I also highly suggest checking out the documentary Doomed, which is available on the Big YT as well. In that film, the cast and crew discussed the story at length in an attempt to understand why everything played out the way it did, and why the decision was made to create the film at all and leave the entire production and the dark about it.
When we come back, it's time for Poxy and I to say so long. You're listening to The Ghost of Hollywood. This is Madame Eduarda with Helio Gabala.
Madame Eduarda with Helio Gabala, right here on The Ghost of Hollywood. I'm Poxy Leonard with Miss Ragan, and the time has come for us to say goodbye again. A big thank you to Danny Bilson for being on the show with us here tonight to talk about his work on Trancers. Also, thanks to Chris Klon for his hard work developing this episode alongside Ragan and I. And to KBOO 90.7 FM Portland for providing a platform and support of this program since its inception.
For more information on The Ghost of Hollywood, please visit our website at theghostofhollywoodpodcast.com or check out our page on kboo.fm. Both also feature an archive of previous episodes, which are available for download. The Ghost of Hollywood can also be found on all current streaming platforms, so please subscribe, like, and listen so that we can continue to grow the program with each episode.
We'll be back next month with another brand new episode of The Ghost of Hollywood, so stay tuned for more information as it releases. You can also follow us on Instagram at The Ghost of Hollywood. Up next, we're going to leave you with one, and it's brand new, coming out of Rochester, New York. I like it a lot, so I've been playing it here a bit lately. This is by a band called Danny's Favorites, and the song is I Got a Feeling for a Feeling.
That's a wrap for the episode 10. Until next time, good morning and good night.